recording? Okay, so you probably see a little message saying, hey, acknowledge that this is being recorded. If you need to turn your camera off for that reason, go ahead. Just please pay attention. You are responsible for this information and it's really important. So with that, we're going to skip ahead to something you did, hopefully, for preparing for this session, is to take the cultural humility tool. Now, this is not researched fully. It's what I did was I took a combination of a couple of tools that were out there and put them together. It's just for discussion and kind of reflection purposes. You do not have to, I'm going to tell you how to score it and give you a minute to do that. You don't have to ever share your score with anybody else, but I just want you to use it to kind of get yourself thinking and maybe sort of as a baseline for where you might try to move in the direction of. We all can be better and continue learning about other cultures and about other people. And so you'll never be done in this process. So there's not like a top score, like getting 100%. So here's how you score it. Add up the number of times you made a mark in each column, and then you're going to multiply it times a certain number. So in the never, however many nevers you have, that'll just be that number. However many sometimes in the second column, multiply that times 2. However many fairly often, multiply that times 3, and always you'll multiply that total number by 4 and then add those up. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to do that. All right, so hopefully you've had time to do that math. And I want you to just think about your takeaway from that. Obviously, the higher your score, the more culturally humble or culturally responsive you are. Used to call that culturally competent, but we're going to talk about in just a few minutes why that is not the preferred or most accurate term anymore. The lower your score is, the more work you probably have to do to learn about other cultures and just things that are different from what you've already had experience with or been exposed to. Now let's look at this part, this little table on your guide for today. We're going to go through this kind of quickly, but I want you to think about things about how this really impacts your ability to be an effective OT practitioner. So I call this putting a scrub on it. And what I mean is like kind of scrub away your existing ideas or assumptions about this type of thing, and then flip it. Think about what's another way I could possibly think about this, and maybe that's a better way. So here's the first scenario. When you go into a patient's hospital room to see him for an 11 a.m. OT session, family members are still wearing their PJs and they look like they hadn't brushed their hair yet that day. The lights are out. It's 11 o'clock. So what's something you could, or someone could assume when you walk in that room? Anybody want to share?
They just woke up.
Yeah. So I'll tell you that this scenario happened in my first year as an OT, and I remember walking into the room of a kid on the rehab unit, the neuro floor at Le Bonheur, and this was happening. The lights were out. There were like 3 adults in there, and everybody in the room was asleep or like just barely waking up, and it was 11 o'clock. It's not like it was early. And what I thought in my brand new baby OT head was, are they lazy? Do they not care if their kid gets better? Because they knew I was coming at that time, and it's not early. It's not like it's 7 a.m. But that's what I thought. But what's a different way to think about that?
They could have been up all night with the kid that was sick, or they're just struggling with it in general, like with him being in the hospital.
Yes, that's much more accurate and much more culturally responsive. Now I'm just thinking about this family's individual scenario. And, I don't know their emotional state. I don't know what goes on or what has been going on when I wasn't there. I do know how it is to be in the hospital or to be a family member with somebody in the hospital and you don't get a good night's sleep. It's kind of ironic, right? You should sleep to get better, but they wake you up and there's noises and stuff all night long. So that instead of going in that room and thinking, they don't care if their kid gets better. Gosh, what I should think is they've got a lot going on. They're probably under a lot of stress. They probably were interrupted and disturbed all night long. Let me come in and be positive and, find out how I can support them as I'm getting their kid for the OT session. Next, a man who's getting out of a car with a handicapped or wheelchair accessible parking permit walks to the door of the mall and he looks fine. He doesn't have a wheelchair, walker, crutches, cane, nothing. Something someone could assume is that's not his permit. He's just driving the car, he doesn't have a disability, or he stole it, or he's a liar or faker. But what else could be happening is he might have what we call an invisible disability. Maybe he can only walk a certain amount of distance before he gets very fatigued or would need a wheelchair. It could be a lot of different things, but it's important if that thought flashes in our heads when we see that kind of situation, it's important to think, wait a minute, that may not be an accurate picture. The parent of a child with a disability often arrives late at the clinic, 15 or 20 minutes late when they come in for outpatient OT. Now, this scenario came from something that happened at RKS years ago. I think I told y'all about this, that there was a student who was in there with me and we were waiting for the parent and child to show up for an appointment, and they didn't show, and we tried to call and they didn't answer. And the student said, something to the effect of I don't understand why a parent wouldn't bring their kid to an appointment because it's free here and we're going to help them. It's like they don't care if their child gets better. And that's an assumption that somebody could make. But what we talked about and what really I want you to think in a case like this is they're struggling. They've got some stuff going on that we don't know about. Maybe we have or haven't ever experienced anything like it. But we have no data to tell us that the person doesn't care if their child gets better. Very likely that is not the case. Last one, the teenage sibling of a child you're seeing for OT makes a crude joke and the parent's right there and they don't say anything. This one's also happened to me in real life. And what I thought at the time was this adult isn't a good parent. They don't have control of their household. They don't discipline their kids. What's going on in this family. But the truth of the matter is, maybe that they don't care if their kids tell jokes like that, but maybe the parents had it up to here that day, or, they are focused on what the child you're working with is doing, and they don't want to get distracted about what the teenage sibling is doing. Could be lots of different things. Maybe they realize that the teenage sibling is really stressed, and that's the way they diffuse their stress. Could be a lot of things, but all this to say, we all have assumptions, things that come up in our heads, pop into our heads, and based on our past exposure or learning or experiences, and they're not necessarily true, and they can even be harmful to our relationship with our patient or client or their families, or to others, or to our ability to care for this person adequately. So challenge that. One example or something that may come up for you guys in the near future is you will be invited to participate in interviews in the admissions process. Like you may remember in your own interview, there was an OT student, a current student present as part of the team doing the interview, and you all will have the chance when we are doing this next round of admissions to sit in on some interviews. And it's very important to recognize and try to disrupt your own implicit bias. An example I'll give is, what if there is a potential prospective student who shows up for the interview and they're not dressed up? Maybe they have on like what I do, a sweatshirt. We could think, well, they don't care about this. They're weren't raised right, or they're not smart enough to figure out you don't wear a stained sweatshirt to an interview. Or maybe they just came from a job at a warehouse, or they, don't have a washing machine and they hadn't been able to get to the laundromat. Could be a lot of different things. But we need to guard against making those kinds of assumptions that would lead us to think or act in a certain way that might be harmful to someone else. So what is culture? We're talking about cultural responsiveness and cultural humility. What is it? It's just the way that a particular group thinks, speaks, and does things. It includes their music, their clothing, their language, their patterns of interaction, their parenting. A lot of times their cultural practices and beliefs that are around birth and death and marriage and, different other important points in somebody's life. This, I think, is a powerful graphic. It's called the cultural iceberg. And it shows that there are some aspects of culture that are above the waterline, right? So they're easily visible. We can identify them. They're pretty obvious, like, what kind of food a group of people tends to cook or like or share. What holidays they celebrate. That's kind of obvious. But look how much of that iceberg is under the surface of the water. Lots of things like beauty ideals, their concept of justice, their gender roles, their child rearing practices, the way they think about and treat the elderly people in their group or community or country, their attitude towards foreigners or people from other countries or locations. We all have connections to one or more culture, most of us many cultures, and that influences us, our thinking, our behavior about ourselves, about our own cultural groups, our families, and others. So let's talk about this. This is going to be really important to stay caught up with what I'm talking about here. There are different terminologies, different ways of saying similar things that we have progressed with over the years. So when we're talking about interacting with people and how we think about people of different cultures. So in the early 20th century, there was a lot of immigration, right? Paris Island, a lot of people coming in from other countries who had different cultural practices and beliefs. And the term that emerged in those that were already in the US, and kind of viewed themselves as the dominant group, the term that emerged was cultural tolerance. Now, there's something wrong with that, though. The term, the word tolerance, it's pretty easy to see that means my way of thinking and doing things is better, but I'll just tolerate yours. And I guess that was a good starting point, but it's not the way that things should have continued. It's a position of power or superiority. So things in really kind of the mid 1900s advanced, and we started saying cultural awareness and cultural sensitivity. And that's better, but it still comes from a point of superiority, like my cultural way of doing things is better, but I'll be aware of some of the other ones and I'll be sensitive to those. That's kind of what that conveys. Cultural awareness also, which you will still see and hear out there sometimes, but it's not the preferred term because it's passive. If I'm aware of something, like if I'm aware there's a dog scratching on my front door, I notice it, but I'm not doing anything actively. Same with other cultures. It's a very passive mindset, and we don't want to be passive in what we're doing here. So things have progressed then, and in the mid 1980s, and a little bit beyond that. So when I was in OT school, the big term that emerged is cultural competence. And unfortunately, we sort of got stuck with that or on that term. Many people, even a lot of AOTA literature and things that you'll see out there, people are still saying that, and it's outdated. The reason is because the term competence implies that you reach a finishing point. There's a saturation point, so a finish line. So if you are competent in medical terminology, you know enough to do whatever you need to do, right? But that's not going to be true with culture, because their cultures change over time, and there's so many of them. You're never going to know enough. You're never going to know it all. You're never going to know 80% of whatever, infinity there is to know about other cultures. So cultural competence is not a good term. The best term, or the term we've kind of come to so far, is cultural humility. And if we are humble, if we have humility in our thoughts about cultures and our understanding of our own and other cultures, that shows that we are open to learning more. We realize we're never going to know it all. We're always going to have to keep learning. We are not the expert. Nobody is. And there's no one culture that's better than others. Cultural humility then is a lifelong process of self-reflection, self-critique, self-awareness, where we realize what we know, what we think, and what we don't know about cultures, our own and the million others that are out there. And so we always have to be open to learning and be active in our pursuit of additional knowledge. That is the way you can become a culturally responsive OT practitioners. Or so you then, through becoming or staying culturally humble, continuing to learn, will be equipped to provide the best culturally responsive care. So what that term really means is, it communicates a state of being open about learning about other cultures, and also to being in a partnership with your future clients and others, because it's not their job to teach you about their culture, but it is your job to learn and to continue to learn about other cultures. Let's talk just for a minute about what kind of the cultures and situations of people in the Memphis area, in this region, might look like. So I'm going to show you a website just for a second that is where I got this data. Okay. And you can even go there and see the data on your own. The website is careshq.org. And this is what happens when you go to that. You enter a location. So let me just enter Memphis. And then it zooms in on that and you get this data. Look at that in the orange, kind of butterscotch colored. Those are areas of our region, the Mid-South, you could say, that are deemed to be living below the poverty level. Look at that. Those that are in red, kind of maroon there, are said to be above the poverty level. So the just bare minimum of education and of economic resource or income. So that's a lot of areas that are not. The purple, which they're just a couple that are showing on this, means that most people in that area have less than a high school degree. So they did not complete their high school education. You can see, that you can even click and get the numbers of specifically there, but a lot of us live in some of those kind of butterscotch or even maroon colored areas. And a lot of our clients are going to come from those areas. And so it's important to be aware of how resourced those areas might be, because they're going to be your future clients and even your coworkers, and it might even be you. So the poverty level, which by the way is very, very low. It's, I believe, for a family of two, it's something like $18,000 a year of income. That's really tough to live on. And I think as a grad student now, who's probably living on very limited income, you can relate on some level to this, that there are decisions you have to make almost on a daily basis about where the money that you have most needs to be spent. Do you need a book, or do you want to go to Chick-fil-A for lunch every day this week? That sort of decisions. And so all this to say that poverty has a huge impact on health, a huge impact. And there are a lot of people in our area that are living under that poverty level. So in the US, about 15% of the population is under the population or poverty level. In the state, about 17%. In our county, about 20% or about a fifth. In Memphis, in the Memphis city limits, about 26%. So about a fourth of all people are living under the poverty level. And many of those people end up with health problems. So look at this data. I will not ask you this stuff, but it's important to know and to think about. So this is hot off the press. I actually just pulled this morning, so it would be really, really accurate. This is the top 10 leading causes of death in the US right now. Look at that number one, heart disease. Almost 700,000 people a year in the US die from heart disease. Cancer, accidents, COVID-19, that's in there, stroke, other things going on down, diabetes, kidney disease, things like that. So think about the connection of all of those things to poverty or to resources. And by that, I mean to access to healthy food, access to somewhere where it is safe to exercise, access to somewhere you can go outside and there's not a whole bunch of pollution or crime or danger, access to healthcare, access to information about health, all of those things. There are many neighborhoods, many parts of our city or our county that are very under-resourced. And those people living in those areas are much, much more likely to have any of these things happen to them and become part of these statistics. Oops, hold on one second. Let me back up. All right. Okay, so here, how many of you, well, I'm just curious to know, if you have your camera on, maybe raise your hand if you can. How many people have ever heard someone say, I don't see color? I'm not racist. I don't see color. I think everybody's the same. I've heard that a lot. I grew up in about 3 hours south of here in a small town in Mississippi. And I will tell you, I heard this, probably through a lot of my growing up years or something similar to it. And even still, I think some people who are from my old hometown, and they probably think of themselves as sort of woke or, open in their thinking, they still say this. And this is not and that's why this is kind of a joke meme here, that it was a Karen that said it in 2020. And there's a problem with this though, because it relates back to what we're talking about. What you need to know, we all have different cultures, right? We're not all the same. The fact of the matter is, now we are all, deserve equal access to healthcare and education and a healthy food and safety and things like food and shelter, things like that. We are all equal in our need and our state of being deserving of those things, but we're not all the same. And so when we are not thinking in those terms about people needing access and deserving access to those things, but having different situations that they're coming from or living in, when we don't realize that and recognize that in our interaction with our clients and others, we are not being culturally humble and culturally responsive. So I'm going to point you to some resources now. Now, I've mentioned this one to you before, and I will again, because I'm on the board for this group, this international group that is the premier group doing the work of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, anti-racism, and anti-oppression in the OT profession. This is the 10th anniversary of COTAD. And we have become an international organization, doing the work, trying to make lots of those things very accessible and either free or at least very financially affordable for lots of OT students and practitioners. So here's something that you can do to become more culturally responsive in your journey towards being an OT practitioner. Become an active member of the COTAD chapter here at our school. There are over 100, I think last count, there are maybe 127 COTAD chapters at OT and OTA programs across the country. Now, a COTAD chapter is a group of students that have gotten together to recognize that it's important to learn about other cultures, to expand what we know and how we think about other cultures as you work towards becoming a more effective OT practitioner. So our COTAD chapter was the first in the state. It's about almost 5 years old now, and they regularly have activities about at least once a month. And you can even meet with the planners of that group and learn more. You also can follow COTAD, or we call it kind of Big COTAD or COTAD National, and that's the big group for OT practitioners and students. You can follow that group on social media and subscribe to updates on the website. Visit the website. So that website is cotad.org. Now, if you are in SOTA, you are automatically a member of the COTAD chapter, as long as you attend at least some of their activities. And so you are part of this organization already. You just need to be active in that participation. Here's another resource. Well, let me talk about this term just a second. I mentioned earlier that we all are members of various cultural groups. Right. I don't know that there could be somebody that is only part of one group. So mine, just for example, might be female. I'm a group, part of the Caucasian people. I am a group of Southerners, of OTs, OT educators, people who are teachers, people who like animals, a whole bunch of different cultures or groups that I belong to, parents, grandparents now, Memphians, a whole bunch of different groups. And so are you. So are each of your clients and coworkers. We all have different backgrounds that intersect. And so I want to introduce you to a term, if you're not already familiar with it, and that's intersectionality. So this term was actually coined by a person who was an attorney, a law professor named Kimberly Crenshaw, and she termed it in 1989. If you want to learn more about the origins of this term, or this term even in general, the concept of intersectionality, Google her and find her TED Talk, Kimberly Crenshaw. It's very much worth watching. But the theory itself actually began a couple decades ago, but then she really pushed the term forward. The term, or the concept of intersectionality, originated really in the late 60s, early 70s, when Black females in our country really started talking about how they found it difficult or challenging to identify with issues of the feminist movement, because the feminist movement, at least in that time, was so heavily dominated by white women. And so many of the white females that were involved in pushing forward that feminist movement, the majority of those women did not work outside the home, right? They were housewives and homemakers. That's how it was in that time period. And that was not necessarily true for the Black women in this country. And so they had trouble relating to that. They were females, they were women, and they subscribed to a lot of those feminist beliefs that equality for all, and, there should be shared power and shared recognition for people regardless of gender. That's really what feminist theory started out thinking about. But those Black women's backgrounds and their cultural beliefs from a racial or ethnic standpoint had to intersect or cross over with those feminist belief systems. And so lots of people have those different belief systems, and there's a podcast out there. That's where this graphic came from. And it's called Intersectionality Matters. And there's an episode of it that is with Kimberly Crenshaw. And she actually talks about the stuff that I'm talking about, the history of it. And so here's an important, it's episode 37, called Black, and the title of that episode is Black Women's Health Through the Twin Pandemics. So that means the racial uprising and things that really came to a head in 2020, and COVID-19, which affected the Black community much more heavily in different ways than it affected the community at large or other ethnic groups. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing to continue learning, especially if you're a podcast person like me. This podcast, episode 37, or any of the episodes. And here's the important takeaway from this talk about intersectionality. Differences exist. It's easy to think that everybody from a certain cultural group thinks the same, like all people who are Jewish, all people who are Christian, all people who are women, all people who went to private colleges, all people who are in grad school or healthcare providers or teachers. It's easy to think all those people think the same, and that's the only lens they have to look through, but that's not accurate. It doesn't really represent reality at all. We all have unique experiences and unique groups and belief systems that we identify with, and we all have multiple ones of those, and they're all valid. Another podcast I want to turn you on to, if you're not already familiar with it, is an NPR podcast called Code Switch. Now, when I first heard of this, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, I thought it was about coding, like computer coding. And I was like, well, that's not really for me. But it's actually about race, ethnicity, identity, culture, and how the term code switch means it's describes our behaviors when we act in a different way than we normally would act, because we're just trying to fit in. So if somebody is more in the minority group and they are around other people who have different patterns than they do, they might act like they are going with the mainstream, but they're changing their outward behaviors or actions or the way they talk. An example might be if somebody from California comes to our OT program, where most of us are Southerners. Most of us have a Southern accent, at least to some degree, and that person from California may try to switch the way they talk because they don't want to be different. So there are lots of good episodes of this podcast, and if you are a podcast enthusiast like I am, I recommend it for your continued learning. Now, I mentioned COTAD earlier, and I want to talk about an upcoming event. COTAD has book club meetings. They're all virtual. They are all free, and they're all open to anybody who pre-registers. And they actually call it a book plus club because they don't just read books. Sometimes they'll do it on a journal article or sometimes a podcast episode. And so if you are interested in doing that, and you can count that as part of your professional development as an OT student, you can sign up on the COTAD website, cotad.org, and click on events. And it's right there at the top. This next one that's coming up next week at 7 p.m., our central time zone, where they are going to discuss reflections on race and resilience in Vallejo, California. So you can go, and an OT is going to lead that discussion. It'll be very interactive, a good learning opportunity that won't cost you anything except your time. So you can sign up for that, and then you'll get the Zoom link. It'll be emailed to you like the day or the night before this actually happens. So with that said, I want to go into really one more Kahoot that is going to really kind of bring some things home that we have talked about in this session. All right. So this one just has 3 questions. They're sort of scenarios. So log in, and you can log in anonymously if you want. 946-3173. All right, let's go on. We got almost everybody, and the rest of y'all, you can always see the game pin in the bottom corner, even when the game is started, if you're having trouble logging in, or just, watch along with us. Learning about cultural responsiveness. 3 scenarios. What should the OT do? A client says he can only do his home exercises 6 days a week because of his religious practice of observing the Sabbath. So 1 day a week, he can't do it because of his religious practices. What would you do? All right, so let's think about this. The most culturally responsive response is to tell him that that's fine. That's to say, you realize that it's important, his religion, right? His religious beliefs and practices, and ask, do you want to, speak to a religious leader and ask if there's an exception to that practice? Now the yellow response is fine too, really. What I would say though, is that you need to you're not saying that the home program isn't important. What you could do though is compromise. So what I would do is to say, I completely respect that. I understand. It is important for you to do it, 7 times a week at least. So could we talk about, you fitting in a second practice session, maybe the day before, maybe on Saturday, or maybe on Wednesday or some other day? What you wouldn't do is say, oh, okay, we'll do it anyway on that day. And what you also wouldn't do is document that the person is non-compliant. And here's why. There's a lot of times that people will put this term in a scenario like this. They'll put that in the record. And it's not very culturally responsive, because you're completely disregarding the person's religious beliefs, right? It's a kind of saying your belief system as a healthcare provider or whatever else, you're coming from. You're saying he's just not doing it. He's non-compliant. He's not following the directions, right? That's not the most culturally responsive. So you could suggest that he speak to a religious leader, or say, I understand that how else can we get in that extra, that 7th practice session? See how that conveys a partnership and respect rather than a sort of a power play or looking down at somebody and saying like, well, you still have to do it the way I'm telling you. Which craft is likely to be the most culturally responsive choice for this session? A client with depression who follows a vegan lifestyle for spiritual reasons is scheduled to participate in an OT group with crafts. What project would you choose? All right, so let's look at these. So the first possible choice, a coin purse leather lacing project with a cross design. There's a couple of issues with that. One is, the cross design that really is linked to Christianity, and that may not be this person's cultural background. The other thing is it said that the person is vegan, and so anything leather is not going to be something that they want to participate. The next one is egg decorating for Easter. Well, same thing there. There's an element of Christianity there that may not be part of the person's culture. And also using eggs and taking eggs from the animal and using them for your own purposes is against the vegan lifestyle beliefs. The last one, the green one, is a dream catcher project using branches and wool yarn. Couple of issues there. One is the wool. That's the most obvious. So that's something that comes from an animal. So that would be not in line with vegan practices. The other one is the dream catcher project, the dream catcher aspect. So that comes from a Native American belief system or practices. And it may or may not be something that client wants to participate in because of their belief system. And so the most correct one is a basket weaving project using bamboo reed. So that's not using any animal product. So that would be in line with the vegan lifestyle. All right, last one. What should the OT document about this client? A 30-year-old Asian man who immigrated a year ago is getting OT at an inpatient mental health facility after developing an addiction to painkillers. Even after being there a week, he barely interacts with anybody else. What are you going to document? All right, good. Most people are thinking in a culturally responsive way. So you don't know if he's depressed just from that description that I gave. He may or may not be. In a lot of cultures, isolating, especially when you are thinking of yourself or have been labeled as sick, isolating is more the cultural norm. We don't know that he has a poor prognosis. We just talked about why you wouldn't say he's non-compliant. Non-compliant means somebody is just being oppositional. They're just refusing just to refuse. And there's no really reason or logic behind it. Like if you say, put your coat on and a 4-year-old says no, you can classify that as non-compliant. But not if it's somebody's religious or cultural beliefs or practices. So the most culturally responsive, correct choice is you would document saying the client's interpersonal behaviors may be influenced by his culture. So you can say he has not interacted with the other clients. He, doesn't speak unless spoken to, other things like that. He wants to go in his room by himself instead of being out in the common room. You could say those things that you observe, but your interpretation of why he's behaving that way should not be he's depressed, he's non-compliant, he's not going to get better. It could be that his actions are influenced or are likely influenced by his culture. All right, so hopefully that is some food for thought. Now, one more thing I will tell you when we're talking about implicit bias is that you are going to have an opportunity to participate in a research project and a training. So in late May, towards the end of this term, there is a training that'll be a 1-hour training. It'll be virtual and it'll be in the evening, so you won't be in class, that you will be invited to participate in. And it is funded by a grant that I got last year. And we did this training once in the fall of last year before you guys were OT students. And it's just implicit or unconscious bias training. It's provided by a national company that does this research and training called the Unconscious Bias Project. And so I use the grant money to pay these people to develop a training that will be offered to anybody that has anything to do with the admissions process in our program. So all members of the admissions committee, all faculty members, and all students who can take part in that admissions process are invited and encouraged to participate in this training, which would count for a PD hour for you guys. So it's just on Zoom one evening. It's already on TeamUp, but I will invite you and remind you closer to it. Any of the second years who, whether maybe that some of them participated in the fall training, if they want to participate again, or if they didn't get a chance to, they can do it. Any of you guys that want to can do it. And then, you know, a lot of our fieldwork educators or community partners, they will participate in the faculty as well. So that is coming up, and it'll really teach us what can we actively do to better recognize and target our own implicit bias. Something very important. Be reflective about it, learn about other cultures, be open to learning, and to kind of try to disrupt any of those stereotypes that pop into your head, those assumptions that come from something in your past, but that may not necessarily be true, and certainly probably aren't true for everybody. And that will help make you be more culturally responsive. Any questions or any comments anybody wants to say before we close? Very important set of information and topics. We'll be talking about this more, and this will link with the talk on social determinants of health, which we were going to have Tuesday, but we'll have in a couple weeks. And then we're going to talk about inclusive healthcare, inclusive language, things like that also have to do with cultural responsiveness later on in this course. All right, so next week, a look ahead is the ERA presentations. Half of them will be Wednesday, half of them will be Thursday, and so be ready for that. We will do them in chronological order. So the 1940s group will go first, the 1950s group will go second, 60s and 70s, those groups will go on Wednesday, and then 80s, 90s, the 2000s, and then 2010 to present will go on Thursday. However, regardless of which day your group is presenting on, the materials, if you are creating a handout, if you want to share your slides, you need to submit. One person in your group will need to submit on Blackboard by the start of class on Wednesday. So by 10 a.m. on Wednesday next week. And then your grade on that assignment will come from the presentation and those materials, and everybody in the group will get the same. thing. So look at all that information under assignments and ERA presentations, and be ready for that. We'll be back on campus, which will be great. It'll be, those presentations will be very interactive and hopefully fun, and help us learn more about what was going on culturally and in society in each of those decades in OT, and just in people in the world and in this country in those different time periods. So got that coming up. All right. Thank you for your attention. And I will see you on Wednesday if I don't run into you before. Be careful out there.
I have a question, Dr.
Yep.
Lancaster.
Yep.
So, if we're doing kind of like a skit kind of thing,
Yep.
does every aspect of it have to be like facts, or can there be like an element of like fiction that we make clear is fiction, or like, does it have to be?
Yeah, I think I'm following, and I know you're just trying not to give too much away, which is totally fair. Some of it can be fiction. So I'll tell you, in the past, there have been groups that'll do skits, and it's not like actually what happened in history. Maybe they're just acting out like what might have happened in politics, or, somebody that was shopping for a go-go outfit, or something like that. It's not actually from the history books, but it is in line with what could have and probably did happen in that era. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And I had
So
another
it's
question.
factually based.
Okay, got it. Just wanted to double check. And I was wondering if anyone else got the like forwarded email about the scrubs. I don't know if anyone knows anything about the scrubs, or they're gonna make us reorder from Landau, or if anybody knows anything about that, because they sent the emails this morning. So
Okay. I don't know if I have seen that, but are they saying that some of the order got lost?
it doesn't have any. It just is like I got it twice. It's a forwarded email from like Scrubs and Beyond, and they like, it's just like you can shop off of it. It's not like reorder or anything. So
They're sending us emails in like groups of when we can pick up our scrubs. They said they're in, but you have to
Okay.
wait to get the email when to say to pick it up.
got it. Thank you.
I knew that, but I didn't know that you would be getting straight from the scrubs. Amberly, do you mind forwarding me one of those when you get a chance, just so I can see it? I don't want that company to be harassing y'all, is my main concern. I mean, any communication you get about the scrubs should come directly from UTHSC, and very possibly or probably from Terry Fott. She's the
Right.
person in our college that's in charge of that kind of thing. So it's weird to me that you might be getting an email directly from the company.
Yeah, I
They're
thought it
just
was weird too.
They're just advertising their company. You can unsubscribe from their emails.
Okay, that's
At the
annoying.
bottom of the
Yeah.
thing. It's just their
So
advertising.
The reason I was asking is because I'm going to say something to Terry, like she needs to say to that company, they don't need to be selling your email addresses or harassing y'all. That's not cool. But on your end, just unsubscribe, delete, you should not be ordering or reordering unless Terry Fott tells you to.
Right.
I
I
don't
wasn't going to. I was just like, why am I even
Okay,
getting
don't give a
this?
credit card number. No.
No.
Um,
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? Thanks for letting me know about that. I get the emails that y'all get from Terry, but I've not gotten anything from that company. That's not cool.
Do you think we will have class tomorrow on